the biggest lesson I learned is you've got to work with the clients in a way that they can understand. And it's a journey for them. It's not, it's probably like this in every industry, although I've never owned a business in the other industries, but essentially, if you don't know what they're trying to accomplish, what their pain point is, where they are now, that kind of thing, and help them through that journey of figuring out how to stop what they're doing now to get closer at least to that farther goal, then you've really lost the client. They don't know why you're doing what you're doing. They don't know if this is a scam. They don't know, everybody's so kind of skeptical nowadays. You really have to take them through that journey. There is really a client journey you have to take people through.
So I just wrapped up my conversation with Lisa Sakai, and Lisa has a really interesting career story. She actually started out trying to have a career in Hollywood before she jumped to teaching, then to insurance, to ultimately what she's doing now and feels is her calling, which is financial planning. And we spoke about a lot of really great and interesting stuff, including some practical financial advice for everyone out there to really get them started to think about the long run and what they want their financial journey to look like during their lives and what the future of financial planning looked like. But in particular, I think some of the most important topics we discussed were how she went on that unique career path and ultimately how she found her calling, and also the truth about starting to save for retirement in your 40s and 50s, and lastly, her number one piece of advice for retirement planning. I really enjoyed my conversation with Lisa and thought she had a lot of really great things to say overall and stuff that people could really take away a lot of value from. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Lisa Sakai. Lisa, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So here's where I want to start out. So you're a financial consultant and you have a really important job getting to help people with their financial planning and really plan for the future and really to alleviate a lot of stress. But here's where I want to start out. You actually started and tried to go into Hollywood. So I'm just
Yeah.
curious, how does someone go from Hollywood to financial planning?
I have another thing in between, which is I was a teacher in between those two. So it's even more complicated than that. I grew up in LA. I grew up in kind of that area. And so I always wanted to work in the movie industry when I was growing up. And so I moved into that when I got out of school. And I didn't have a bad experience in terms of people were nasty or anything. It just wasn't satisfying me to the place I wanted to be at. Basically, I was getting my boss's car detailed and washed for the fourth time that week, which, he was always nice about asking, but it was kind of a waste of my time to get that washed again.
Intern duties.
And yeah, exactly. And it was before iPhones and it was before all that. So I was just sitting there actually thinking and not, being distracted. And I just thought, is this really the impact I want to make? I work really hard. I want to make an impact, and is this really doing it? And I just decided no, that if I was going to work this hard and be dedicated to something, I wanted to make a big difference for people. And I didn't feel like I was doing that there, that I
So
was ever going to have the chance to do that. So that's why I ended up moving to teaching. And then from teaching, 2008 happened and that whole thing. And so I just decided to move away from that and really make the impact I want, which is in financial planning. So that's my very shortened version of it.
So going back to growing up in LA, I'm just curious, does everyone that grows up around there, do they seem to want to do the entertainment vibe when they get older? Like, is that a consensus among the community?
Yeah, I mean, not everybody. There were a lot of people there were a lot of my friends who wanted to do it, but no, I would say probably the majority don't. I grew up kind of in the Pasadena, so suburbs of LA area, and so it just, it was one of those things that I loved movies. I still do, but I liked being part of that creative process. And I think that if you are creative, then immediately you are going to start thinking about going to Hollywood. Probably that's probably like, I didn't know anybody that wanted to be like an artist or something. Like anybody who's creative wanted to move into Hollywood. So that's probably the majority of who wants to go there is just the creatives.
So you spoke about how in between Hollywood and financial planning, you were a teacher, and when
Mhm.
2008 happened, a really unfortunate time, a lot of um, a really volatile time to say the least, a really controversial
Yeah.
time. I'll leave it at that. You can, I think, a thousand ways to look at it, but not a pleasant time for everyone around. How did you make the pivot from becoming a teacher to financial planning? I mean, I know you said that 2008 really affected you, but
Mhm.
like what spark came, or kind of what was the experience that made you decide, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is my why.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I still have that same motto of if I'm going to be doing something, I want to really impact and help people. And the thing that I think, and this is, I'm not getting political. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm getting on that line, but I think my experience with teaching was that it was a very corporate environment, which is not what you expect
It
in
tended to be more like
teaching.
conservative approach in the sense that was like,
Yeah,
and when we say conservative approach, we mean like it's been done that same way for a very, very long time, and it wasn't a
exactly.
change to like meet the current needs of just like the times and people's learning abilities.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, exactly. And so it was things like I was trying to help a student figure out how to do multiplication, and he was having a really hard time memorizing it. And I said, well, it's fast addition. So if you can remember, 7 times 5 is 35, then you can remember that 7 times 8 or 5 times 8 is 40 because you just add another 5. It's fast addition. And the principal was in the room while I was doing that, and he pulled me aside and said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Well, why not? That's actually what it is." But he said that that's not the way we teach them to do it. And I had lots of those kind of experiences. And on top of that, I was getting pink slipped or getting let go a lot. And so, you get pink slipped at the end of the year. They would rehire you at the beginning of the next school year to keep you at the same pay level, which was very low. I mean, no teacher makes a ton of money, but but it was the lowest. They basically were trying to keep new teachers at the lowest rank for as long as possible because their budgets had been constrained. And that made me mad more than anything. So because I had to clean up my whole classroom and then I had to keep coming back and putting it all together. It was driving me crazy. So I started going on monster.com and those kind of things. I don't know if monster.com even exists anymore. It's probably aging me, but I went on there, started looking at different things. And I noticed that the insurance industry in particular likes teachers, and they like teachers because we can explain things in a way that's understandable to the clients rather than necessarily financial gurus. People who went to school for finance tend to talk in financial language that customers and clients can't understand. And so they love having teachers come in because they can explain things in a better way. And so that was kind of my entrance into this world. I talked to tons of different companies, and so that's kind of how I got into the insurance side, which led to doing financial planning because I'm of the mindset I can't do insurance or do investments without knowing what we're trying to accomplish. I just think that's impossible to do.
So insurance is also a really interesting industry and a really controversial industry in addition.
Yeah.
But from spending time in insurance and making the pivot from teaching to working within insurance and specifically what you did, what do you think you learned in insurance that really helped you out towards your future career?
Yeah, I learned 2 things. I learned what I didn't wanna do,
That's
and I
good.
learned how to help people. So, like you said, it's a very controversial because there's a lot of people in insurance to make a lot of money, and, things are being sold that shouldn't be sold. Things are getting explained away that they weren't s that they're not it's not true. That's not exactly what happens with things, and it's not as regulated as what I do now. It's insurance regulated, and basically you can sell a product and never talk to that client again. And that did not appeal to me. That's not what the kind of relationship I wanted to create with clients was. But I think so that's why I learned what I didn't want. I wanted to build long-term relationships with my clients, and the insurance is a piece of it. But I think what I really learned is that by starting by talking about insurance, I'm I was missing what clients actually wanted, which was to have somebody figure out with them what they're trying to accomplish and how to get there. It's a very old school way of looking at financial planning, but it's the best way, which is where are we going, where are we now, and how are we going to get there? And if I start with insurance, that's a middle piece. That's not a where are we going or where are we now. And that's probably the biggest lesson I learned is you've got to work with the clients in a way that they can understand. And it's a journey for them. It's not it's probably like this in every industry, although I've never owned a business in the other industries. But essentially, if you don't know what they're trying to accomplish, what their pain point is, where they are now, that kind of thing, and help them through that journey of figuring out how to stop what they're doing now to get closer at least to that farther goal, then you've really lost the client. They don't know why you're doing what you're doing. They don't know if this is a scam. They don't know, everybody's so kind of skeptical nowadays. You really have to take them through that journey. There is really a client journey you have to take people through.
So speaking of that, do you think that right now, and I see this a lot happening with professional services, and especially a lot of these larger corporate firms, they're more focused on just kind of selling, a project or selling some kind of deal as opposed to asking the
Yeah.
client like what they want and really seeing if there's kind of, that dual value initiative there.
Exactly. Yeah, I do too. I see that a lot. I see that it's funny, our industry, I feel like presents really well. I'm going to get in trouble for doing this, but whatever. It presents really well of like, we care about what you think, but that's not necessarily the client experience that people have, especially in the big companies, they're a number to them. I had I've had experiences where people will come to me and they've retired or they're changing jobs, and they've called the original company that their stuff was with, and they were going to just leave it there, or they were going to move it to an IRA at the same institution. And they were so frustrated by that process that they took them through, and how they didn't explain anything, and how they just didn't seem to care what their ultimate goal was, that they said, look, I'd rather work with an independent advisor who is going to answer this stuff, who's going to be on my side. We're fiduciaries. We sit on the same side of the table as the client. And, my job is to make sure that they're getting the right service that is going to push them forward in their journey to getting to what they want. And that's the thing that I think is missing. Even though you see all the ads on television and it's, people on the beach enjoying life, and they're like, this could be your life. That's not that's not the experience that they have. It's kind of it's kind of false advertising in many respects.
So, typically raising interest rates aren't really great for anyone, makes the cost of
Mm-mm.
capital more expensive and makes life much more difficult for a lot of people. But I think if there's any silver lining there, at least when it's more difficult to borrow money or when access to capital is more constricted, people think a little bit harder. And I think by fact become a little more diligent of where that money's going. So I think that when we were in that lower interest rate economy, there was a lot more space for this kind of marketing or this kind of activity to happen. At least now, I think people are starting to call BS on a lot of these like sales tactics and realizing it's not valuable to them.
Yeah, I hope so. I really do. I hope so. I think that there's been a lot, just like COVID, just like, 2008, 2009. There's a lot of good things that came out of that. There's a lot of pain that happened with all of that. But at the same time, there's been a lot of good things to come out of the interest rates going up. One being that people have someplace safe to put money. The issue that I was seeing with a lot of people is they were not getting any interest in banks, in high yield savings accounts, high yield savings accounts, it was 0.4%, which was a lot better than the banks, but still not fantastic. So people were pushing money into the market that maybe they shouldn't have, taking on risk that they maybe shouldn't have. And with higher interest rates, you get to have that balance a little bit more, which is nice. So there's always pros and cons to everything.
For sure. A great silver lining to that, at least.
Yeah.
So, to get into some of the stuff that you're doing with financial planning, I want to ask this, on a broader level. So, a lot of people, for whatever reason, delay their financial planning until later on. And I want to
Yeah.
talk about those people a little later. But why do you think people fundamentally delay financial planning?
Because they don't want to deal with it. That's
Very
why
well
I'm a
read.
very honest, open answers, because they don't want to deal with it. Money is very emotional. People don't think it is. People think, oh, if you're a money person or if you're a numbers person, you're very like, do, do, do. That's actually not the way people handle their own personal finances or, even in business, frankly. It's very emotional. And the emotions that are tied to money are often uncomfortable. They've made mistakes. It reminds them of the mistakes that they've made. It reminds them of different things. Maybe mom and dad were screaming at each other about money when they were growing up. And so they have this negative connotation. They have guilt that they haven't started. That's a huge one. The guilt that happens because they haven't started is just built snowballs. It just turns into a big problem. So I think people put it off because it's so much easier to not deal with those emotions. And also, it's overwhelming. I mean, people are like traditional IRA and Roth IRA. And now I have a traditional 401k and a Roth 401k. And then I have this option and this option. And there's a match. And then I get bonus money and I'm not sure what to do with that. Like it just gets so overwhelming that people are like, I just don't want to deal with this. Life's too difficult. I don't want to deal with it. And so I think that those are a couple of the reasons that people just put it off because the immediate there's no immediate gratification essentially in doing your financial planning because everything's so far off. It's 20, 30, 40 years away from now. And it's like, I've got time. I don't have to deal with this pain now. I can deal with it later because it's 40 years from now. And, unfortunately, that's not the right way to build over time, but that's what they do.
No, I had a thought the other day, and I actually tweeted this. It's that instant gratification leads to delayed action, and delayed gratification leads to instant action. So I hope more people can have that really delayed perspective and kind of get their finances in order so they can move forward better.
It's a great quote. I love it. It's awesome.
Appreciate it. One of many that kind of stuff just comes to me and I put it out there. So I hope that
It's
people
great.
take value away from that. But
Yeah.
with regards to financial planning, so obviously with that comes a lot of different products, and with investing inherently there's risk. And as much as we want to say we can predict the future, we really don't know what could happen. I mean, based in PA here, we had an earthquake I think almost a week
I
ago. So
know.
we couldn't predict that, but obviously when people are investing and deciding where they want to put their money, you probably work with people with different risk tolerances. So
Mhm.
how do you handle working with like different clients who have a different tolerance of the kind of risk they want to take?
Yeah. So I think, I tend to work a lot with women, just kind of the nature of it. I like working with women and their families, I always call them women led families. And essentially, women tend to be a little bit more risk adverse than men do. Mainly because I think they think, and it's just differences of the sexes. I think women tend to think much more long term than men do in general. And I think that makes them fearful. I also think they don't get the education that men do about finances in general. I know I didn't growing up, and I was raised in a family that my dad would teach me about anything, but for some reason, finance was just one of those things he didn't talk about. And I think so when you're dealing with people that have different risk tolerances, even in the same family, even if a husband and wife are sitting there and they have totally different risk tolerances, I think you need to make them realize, where they are, why they feel that way, and is that going to get them to where they want to be? And that doesn't necessarily mean pushing people so far out their comfort zone that they're not in the right risk for their investments or for, their overall planning. But I think, sometimes we want to just sit on cash because it makes us feel good. We open up our bank account and it's sitting there, I don't have to worry about the markets going up and down. But what people don't see are the silent killers of your cash, which is things like inflation, especially when it was up to like 8%. You, yeah, it looks like it's the same, but you lost 8%. You lost 8% of buying power, but people don't see that. And I think you've got to kind of just work with people and say, if this is where we're trying to get to, could we maybe push a little bit more, push you a little bit more out of your comfort zone if this is truly what you want? And that's the thing. Sometimes no. Sometimes that's where they want to stay. And we have to change other aspects about their planning. Maybe they need to save more then because they don't want to necessarily be more aggressive in their investing. And that's okay. But people have to realize that no matter where you're sitting on a risk profile, there are always going to be things you've got to compromise on. You've got to push in one area if you're going to pull back in another area. It's just the way it's going to have to work with your planning.
On a similar note, what kind of investment time horizon do you use, or does that also depend on who you're working with?
It depends. Yeah, it depends on who I'm working with. Obviously, if you've got a retired person, they're going to have a much shorter time horizon than somebody who's, 35 or something like that. But I think also you have to figure out per account if you have a brokerage account that's liquid, that's going to have a different time horizon depending on what their goal is with that than an IRA with a 35-year-old. An IRA, you really can't touch it until you're 59 and a half. Probably being a little bit more aggressive for most people makes sense to do that because you're not going to be touching it for, over 20, 25 years at that point, pretty much. But I think there is a kind of myth or a fallacy that once you're retired, you should be super conservative with your investing. And that's not always the case. You should have some money that is conservative that's there for you, for the first maybe 5 to 10 years of retirement. But you might be in retirement for 30 years. That's a long time horizon. So you've got to make sure that you've got, I call them buckets. Most people in our industry say buckets. I'm not sure where this came from. I think it's just the visualization
For
that works best for
basketball, some
people.
basketball analogy.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But you've got your different buckets that, one's more conservative, one's more moderate, one's more aggressive to help keep you going through 30 years in retirement. Because those first years used to be, just the first years and then you'd slow down and then you'd pass away. Well, that's not happening with modern science, modern health and stuff. We've got people going and doing stuff all the way to like 85 years old, and then they slow down for the last 5 years. So you've got to make sure that your money is going to keep up with you.
For sure, really interesting sign of the times, and hopefully we can all live longer and plan accordingly. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of literature on finance and a lot of literature on investing. I'm just curious, do you have a favorite investing book that you've read?
Not really. Mainly because I think that a lot of them are so specific that it's hard to say that that's the right thing for people to do. I would say I think that there are some really good books out there for basic finance. I think Ramit Sethi's book is really good, even though he hates people in my industry. But I think his book is really good in terms of just for people to understand the basics of finance. Um, and he does go through the basics of like investing in terms of like index funds and that kind of stuff. Now, he has a very strong opinion that everybody should be in index funds. I don't think that that's true. I think there are some people that should be in index funds and there are other people that should be in different types of investing than that. But he's a good one to start off with. And I would say that I think the biggest thing that I usually tell clients to do is if they really want to learn about finance, read a lot of different books, and if books are too much for you, read an article a week, just kind of talking about something that maybe is kind of outside your comfort zone that you don't understand. But the more you read about things that you don't understand, the more you start to understand it. And so you've got to be willing to kind of trudge through that information that you don't understand and feel, quote unquote, stupid for a little bit in order to kind of get through so that you understand some more things. I mean, I'm constantly learning. I'm reading articles all the time. I'm like, I don't understand anything that guy just said, but that's okay. I'll just keep going and seeing if I can understand it the next time.
The one thing I would add to that too, there's a guy by the name of, I'm sure those probably sound familiar, Peter Lynch. So he used to run
Hmm.
a really big fund at Fidelity, the
Magellan.
Magellan Fund,
Yep.
and I read all his books. And I've seen a lot of financial literature out there. His advice is, in my humble opinion, in my unprofessional humble opinion, is probably some of the most concrete and basic and
Hmm.
stuff that I think every individual should know, especially investors. So that's
Yeah.
my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, exactly. He's written some good ones. There's definitely some good books out there. I'm never telling people not to read books. I just think to assume, I think what happens for the average person, and it sounds like you're interested in finance, so that this would be
And
not you, and
in another
unfortunately.
lifetime, explored that career path, but doing this now. But
Ah,
that's a story for another
yeah.
day.
Got it. So most people are not that. They read a book to get the tell me what to do and I'll just do it and it will work because they don't want to deal with it. It goes way back to that question of like, why do people put it off so much? They want this checklist that like, check, check, check. Okay, I'm done. I'm set for the rest of my life. And it doesn't work like that because Peter Lynch's stuff, I agree with you. His fundamentals are fantastic. You know what's interesting though? When he was trying to hand off the Magellan Fund to another manager, he couldn't get them to get to the same results he got to. It didn't work. And does that mean he was lucky? There's some luck that happened, but there's some
Part of life.
fundamentals that change. There's different things that happen. There's some, there's certain fund companies like Dimensional Funds is a great fund company. I use them all the time. But, you sit back and you look at their philosophy when it comes to international markets and you go, well, they want a huge percentage of international markets in everybody's portfolio. Does that still apply nowadays? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But it's just kind of one of those things that there might be good set rules, but people have got to it's got to fluctuate a bit because times change so much, and especially with technology and everything. Now India is becoming like a huge force. Which who thought that 10 years ago that India was going to be a big player and manufacturing and having a booming economy, that Japan was going to come back and have their stock market rally the way it has. It's just a really things just constantly change, and so it's always going to change the way that you invest. And so that's always kind of my 2 cents when it comes to these books is read for the enjoyment and understanding of finance in general, investing in general, but don't just take what they say and go apply it because that's not necessarily the right fit for you. And you can make some really, really disastrous mistakes by doing stuff like that.
For sure. I think that's great advice, and I definitely agree. I think reading his books, one of the things that I like that actually Peter Lynch does is he talks about some of his failures in the books and really what he wishes he could have done better. But I also think that a good way to approach it, a good way to read it, just to echo what you were saying, is to read it, understand the thought process, but then apply it to like to modern times, because you have to take into account that you can learn from how people thought, but in my opinion, a lot of people's actions, no matter how great the individual, and no knock on them, because I mean, clearly they
Yeah,
had results, but their actions were dated towards that time. So you have to learn how people thought,
exactly.
but then apply it to the current time. And I think that a lot of times people have difficulty with that, because I think a lot of times when it comes to investing, people tend to be kind of either really science focused, really focused on just like crunching the numbers, trying to predict the future, or a little more toward the art side of just like, oh, every company is a great company, everything's going to go up. So my theory
Exactly.
on this is that it's art. It's my short theory is that it's science and art, but the science comes, but it's more art than science, but the science comes first. So I know that sounded really
Hmm.
convoluted, but the idea is to kind of
Oh,
know how
yeah.
to look at stuff and then also be able to adapt to the time. So I think I can
I
understand
totally
why it's a
agree.
challenge, but that's the kind of vibe people have to go with, I feel.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's the biggest thing. Like I have people who say, well, I bought stocks, individual stocks, and they haven't done well, or they bought this one and it did really well. And I always say, the biggest thing is that you have to have a strategy when you're buying individual stocks. If that's the kind of portfolio you're building, then you do have to have a strategy with that. You do have to know when's your entry point, when's your exit point, what are the things you're going to be looking for, how involved are you going to be with the company, and understanding this, how much risk are you taking, meaning how much of your portfolio is going into that company. There's different things, and you have to realize that a portfolio where everything's going the same direction is actually a bad portfolio, because if everything's going up, that means everything's going to go down too. You need to have some different things in there. And so, you can't just have a portfolio full of stocks with winners. That's just not life. And honestly, that's not that's not the economy. You can't have all the companies going up. So you are going to have some losers, but just having that strategy of knowing, I'm going to enter here, I'm going to exit here. If it drops to this point, that's when I'm going to exit. Feel like you have control of the situation. I think when people don't have a strategy and they're all over the place, that's when that like panic sets in, and that, regret and all that happens. If you just come at it from a very systematic entry point, exit point on the high end, exit point on the low end, it is what it is, then I honestly think you kind of take the emotion out of it, which is good in many respects.
So we spoke about this a little bit earlier, and I want to get back to it about how some people end up delaying their financial planning. And I'm sure you've probably gotten a
Yeah.
chance to cross paths with these individuals, but what advice would you have for someone who's only really starting their financial planning journey in, say, their 40s or their 50s?
Yeah. I think if you're starting in your 40s and 50s, which many people are, unfortunately they are, then I would say you've got to really figure out what you want and how much you want it. I think that we tend to go into or at least in January in particular, I get a lot of calls about starting their financial plan because that's their resolution to do it this year.
Funny.
That's not a great time to do it, mainly because how much do you really want it? And I'm not a miracle worker. I wish I was, but I'm not. And so if you don't want it, then you're not going to get it, meaning you have to put some work into it. You have to take the time to put some things in place. I cannot do everything for you. It's just not possible. And so it's a matter of how much do you want it? When do you want it? And how dedicated are you to that? And I hate to say it, what I'm kind of backhandedly saying is you're going to have to save a lot of money, and you're going to have to cut back on some things that you're frivolously spending on right now if you really want it that bad. If you're just kind of doing it because society has told you that this is what you're supposed to do, it's never gonna work. You have to be committed to that. And that doesn't make you a bad person if you're not committed to it. But I just think it will save you a lot of time and heartache if you figure out, am I willing to sit here and pull back on some of the spending that I'm doing now that makes me happy, and really push and save into this strategy for the next 10 years to make it work, because it's possible. It is possible. It's always possible to get there. It's just how much are you willing to pull back on your current lifestyle to push forward for your future one.
Definitely. That's life. What can we do sometimes?
Yeah. Yeah,
For sure.
exactly. Yeah.
So we alluded a bit to this earlier also, but there are a bunch of different retirement programs out there. I mean, there's different kinds of IRAs, there's different kinds of 401ks.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, what are, some general ones that are out there, and how do you know to decide kind of which one is best for, say, for example, you're working with clients, or what someone can know kind of when they're thinking about which retirement program is best for them?
Yeah, it's always hard to do that. I actually just put a video on my YouTube channel about like why is the Roth like this holy grail of investing, and it's kind of tongue in cheek because I love a lot Roth IRA. I really do. I mean, they're great vehicles to be able to build some wealth into for the future and have some tax free income later on. However, they don't fit for everybody. And it's funny because if you go on social media, that's kind of the it product. It's not really product, but it account that you should have. Everybody's telling you to get a Roth IRA, but maybe you don't qualify for one. Maybe you make too much money. Maybe it doesn't make sense for you to have, to put an after tax money into something. There are reasons that the Roth is not the right product for you. And so I would say, most people will probably gear towards something like that, doing, a Roth IRA or something like that as their first thing to get started in. Um, I think it really kind of just depends. I know that that's going to be a frustrating answer for you because you
Okay.
want an answer, but it really just does depend, because sometimes people say, well, I'm starting at 50 trying to get to retirement. Should I put it all in my 401k? That might not be the best place. I'm not telling people, by the way, not to put in their 401k. I'm just saying that that might not be the best place to put it if your idea is to retire at 65, it might make sense to put some of it there, but someplace else as well, so that you don't have this issue of, all taxable income in retirement. There's just always strategies to look at. So I think the biggest thing is, if you're looking at something like this, you need to go, where a where is easiest for me to save? If your 401k is the way you're going to be able to save and not cause yourself anxiety all the time, then do that, because you're saving at least someplace. And I would say, B, what's your overall strategy? I think there's a big phenomenon on retiring early, the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early stuff. And if that's your goal, to retire at 55, then your 401k should not be your primary place you're saving. It should be part of it, but you should be saving someplace else that you can get to at 55, since, the 401k has the 59 and a half rule on it. So there's just lots of different things that you need to kind of consider before you figure out what's the best place to put it.
So you've been working as a financial planner for quite a while now. What's
Mhm.
something that you wish you knew on day one that you know now?
Oh, everything. Everything. As a business owner or as somebody helping people with financial planning?
Just whichever whichever you wish you knew on day one, or whichever you wish you knew more.
I'll answer both, I guess. As a business owner, I would say I wish I realized I was becoming a business owner. It sounds ridiculous, but I did not actually understand I was becoming a business. I thought it was just a commission based, person, somebody who makes commissions, somebody who makes fees. Like, I didn't realize that I was actually becoming a business owner. So that probably would have been good to know. I still probably would have done it, but I would have done things a little differently if I had actually made that realization that that's what I was becoming. And I would say on day one, I think the biggest thing is that I really wish I had identified my ideal client sooner. I was a generalist for a very long time. I still, work with lots of people in lots of different avenues, but I do have a kind of a niche area I work in. And I find that I do my best work in that niche area because I'm able to systematize it to the point that I can systematize it so that I can personalize it, which, as a generalist, you can't really have a system in place, because it's all over the place, really. So I think that's what I would tell myself, is to really concentrate on figuring out what your niche market and target market's going to be.
That goes to kind of some of the stuff we were saying earlier. Systemizing is more the science of it, so then you can customize the art for every client.
Exactly. Exactly. Because that's the thing, is that I work a lot with women who don't have kids. They have certain, needs and things
Situation.
that basically, yeah, to traditional women who have kids don't necessarily think about as an issue or concern. And so I work with them a lot, and they all are individual. They have their own things, but I kind of have an idea that these are areas that they're going to specifically probably want to take a look at, that women with kids don't necessarily look at. And that's fine. That's why it's personal financial planning, right?
For sure. So, a really hot topic right now is AI, and I'm sure you're
Hmm.
seeing a bunch of articles every
Oh,
single
yeah.
day about how I think Jamie Dimon recently said that AI is going to have the same effect on us that like electricity and like basic inventions that we know now, but
Yeah.
we're crazy intuitive back then. So, from someone that's working in the industry, what impact do you think AI will have on the future of financial planning?
I think AI has already had their impact, had quite a bit of impact. I mean, we started with the robo advisors, where every financial advisor thought, or investment manager thought, that they were going to be out of a job, and that didn't happen. I think, and robo advisors are here to stay. They're around. They're good. They're a good tool for a lot of people.
I thought you were going to
Um,
say they're good people at some point. I was going to be like,
they
wow,
they
AI is
might
really
be good
modernized.
people.
Yeah.
They're good people behind the robo advisor. How's
Yeah.
that? And I think, we've got AI when it comes to certain funds that are run by machines. They're run by computers that are given certain algorithmic trading, basically. And I would argue that's a form of AI, right? They take in information and they immediately spit out a result, and they basically will trade based off of what articles and what headlines are given to them, which I think is making the mark. This is a personal opinion. I have not really read into this, but I think once this kind of trading has become more prominent, which it has, um, that I think it has made our markets much more volatile than it used to be. Because, in the olden days when you had to like actually go in and make the trade, it took some time. You had to assess like how much of an impact this was going to make and that kind of thing. Now you've got a computer that essentially takes in, um, you know, CPI information or something like that, and within seconds has made the trade, and they're all doing it at the same time. And so the market just falls. I mean, we saw that yesterday almost, like the market just falls on that information. And a lot of times as humans, we have to put some kind of story behind it, like, oh, hedge funds decided to, I don't know if I mean, I think hedge funds were part of some of the pullback we've had lately, but I think it's also because of this, this trading that happens on a second notice, and trades happen. And so I think it's definitely making a big impact for sure when it comes to the markets. And I think it will continue to do that. I think it's never going to replace, though, in our industry is personalized planning. I think still when you put in, like if you Google like what kind of an account should I put my money in, it's never going to give you a straight answer. It's never going to give you a personalized answer. It's never going to really walk you through the pros and cons of something, really. And so I mean, I know that from just playing around on Chat GPT and asking it financial questions. Half the time they bring up things I'm like, a client doesn't care about that. I mean, but that's what the systems told them that they should care about. So I think it's always going to be a tool, and it's going to change the environment of finance, but I don't necessarily think it's going to change the need for personal relationships and figuring out, what you're trying to accomplish.
So I don't think AI could probably paint the first version of a Picasso painting. So I think that's maybe
No.
the a good analogy there. So
Yeah, exactly.
here's where I want to kind of leave off or go on a parting note. And we might have talked about this a little bit earlier, but we've been talking a lot about retirement planning. And obviously, it's better to start earlier. But if you had one piece of advice to anybody, say, starting their career fresh out of college, and they're going to have some kind of predictable income, what's your number one piece of advice when it comes to retirement planning?
Yeah, I was actually hoping you were going to ask about this because I read a really interesting article about the Gen Z generation coming up. And it's really sad. They feel like they can't retire at all. Like they feel like they have no chance of ever getting out from under it, basically. So they're just kind of given up hope already, which is really sad. I think it's because of a lot of social media is what they're pointing to, and these big life kind of things that they see, and they're like, there's no way I'm ever going to do that. That's not possible. And it's sad to me. So don't give up. It's always possible to get there. I think the biggest thing is, most people want financial independence, financial freedom. That's what I always say. People say, well, what is the thing that people talk to you about? And it's retirement, but retirement is financial independence, financial freedom. And if you can get there before 65, most people would say, sign me up. I want to do it, because then you have your life back. You have choices on how you want to live your life. You can decide, I hate this job. I don't want to do it anymore. I want to go become an artist and a painter someplace instead. And you have the capability of doing that without worry about how you're going to put food on the table. Um, and so realistically, if the younger generation focused on, do I want financial independence, financial freedom, and when do I want it by? That makes life so much easier. That does not mean you have to quit your job and go around in an RV for the rest of your life after that. Like some people do that, and that's fine. That does not mean you have to change life at all, but it just provides you with so many choices when you get to that financial independence, financial freedom piece, because now you're in control of what you do and how you spend your time. And there's that old saying where they say, I want to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, spend as much as I want, and not have any consequences. And that's what financial independence really is. And I think if you can focus on that rather than retirement, which is kind of a loaded word because we think you've got to be 65, 67 to retire, and it just feels like so far away. Financial independence can be a lot closer than you think if that's what your ultimate focus is.
Definitely. Well, Lisa, thanks so much for that awesome advice, and thanks for providing a lot of this financial value and for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. I loved it.